Sound check, 1, 2, 3, 4. Sound check, 1, 2, 3, 4.
Okay, so we are going to get started. I think we're live. We're already live, so that's great. Welcome back, everyone. Clerk Trenum, could you please confirm that quorum is present?
Yes, Mayor Horvath, quorum is present.
Okay, thanks so very much. So here we are at our special council meeting, December 11th, 2024. And as we have quorum present for today's meeting, I'd like to call the special meeting of City Council to order. City of Hamilton is situated upon the traditional territories of the Erie, Neutral, Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and Mississaugas. This land is covered by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, which was an agreement between the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe to share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. We further acknowledge that this land is covered by the Between the Lakes Purchase 1792 between the Crown and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. Today, the City of Hamilton is home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, North America, and we recognize that we must do more to learn about the rich history of this land so that we can better understand our roles as residents, neighbors, partners, and caretakers. Members are reminded that all electronic devices are to be switched to a non-audible function during council meetings. So we'll start with the approval of the agenda. Clerk Trenum, are there any changes to the agenda?
No, Mayor, there are no changes to the agenda.
Okay, thanks very much. May I have a motion then to approve the agenda as presented? Moved by Councillor Kretsch, seconded by Councillor Spadafora. Can we go to the vote, please? Oh, votes up. Thank you. No problems. Thumbs up for Councillor Jackson. That carries 13-0. Thanks very much. Declarations of interest. Members of council, are there any declarations of interest? Seeing none, we'll go on to the staff report. And I guess there's an option here. We can defer the staff report till after the private and confidential, or we can do the staff report first and then go into the private and confidential. The decision being such that there may be information provided in the private and confidential that may answer questions that you may have on the staff report. But certainly it's up, I'm in your hands. So just by a kind of sense, move it till after, or staff report first, folks? Hello? Anybody care? Okay. All right. So it looks like people are, the people who care are saying staff report first. I'm only kidding you. Are saying staff report first. So we'll go on to the staff report. 3.1 Lobbyist Registry Jurisdictional Scan FCS 24052 citywide. May have a motion to receive report FCS 24052. Moved by Councillor Paul, seconded by Councillor Alex Wilson. Any discussion on the report? Okay. I see no discussion on the report, so we can then go to the receipt of the report. Please take a vote on that. The vote will go up. Okay. Thanks so much. Oh, Councillor Clark? Okay, Councillor Clark, did you have something on the report? Because we're in the middle of a vote.
On item 4 before you get to the motion, if you
Okay, all right, so we'll continue with the completion of this vote. Sorry about that, folks. And that carries 14-0. Thanks very much. We do have item 4, which is the private and confidential portion of the meeting, and moving into closed session. I did see Councillor Clark had a comment, although there's really nothing on the floor at this moment until we actually put the motion on the floor to move into closed session. Is that what you wanted to talk about, Councillor Clark?
Yes, so if you wanted to move the motion and then recognize me, that would be...
Sure, I think procedurally, that's probably the right thing to do. So assuming, though, that we have somebody that's going to put the motion, moved by Councillor Alex Wilson and seconded by Councillor Wang, the motion to move into closed session to consider item 3.1 pursuant to section 9.5 of the city's procedural bylaw 21-021 as amended, and section 2392, section 2393.1 of the Ontario Municipal Act 2001 as amended, as the subject matter pertains to a meeting being held for the purposes of educating or training members, and that at the meeting no member discusses or otherwise deals with any matter in a way that materially advances the business or decision making of council or the committee. Members of the public, assuming that this motion passes, the meeting will continue following the closed session portion of the meeting, and we will dispose of the rest of this until we have the discussion on the motion that's in front of us. If this motion passes, then I'll read out the last 2 paragraphs which talk about the procedures that come following the going into camera. So on that note, Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm struggling a little bit. I understand we have the right as a council to have confidential workshops. When it comes to lobbyist registry training, I wonder why we would not be doing that in public, because the onus is really on all those people who should be registering themselves, and I don't think many businesses understand the process and many leaders understand it. So if someone could help me understand why we would not be holding this in open session.
Thanks, Councillor Clark. I guess I would look to, I'm not sure who to look to, the clerk, city manager, or the integrity commissioner themselves, or lobbyist registrar, rather.
I'll perhaps start with you, Mayor, only that as a matter of practice, whenever we are providing education to council, to allow the freedom to ask questions, especially direct to our integrity commissioner who acts as the lobbyist registrar in this situation, we would recommend you have that as an option, and council may wish to have that. It would not prevent you from continuing discussion or comments leaving closed session or to provide additional public information after the fact. But it is within your right to conduct the education in closed.
Thanks, Clerk Trenum. I don't know if anybody else has anything further to say. I think that
the integrity commissioner is here. He did rise. I'm not sure.
So can I just hold on for 1 second. My understanding when I went through the agenda review on this was also had to do with the fact that there may be specific incidents that people want to refer to as examples of what they didn't understand would have happened maybe, or should have happened, or didn't happen, or should have happened. And when you're kind of asking questions about specific people or organizations or situations, you could get yourself into a bit of a quandary when it comes to public disclosure. So on that note, I'm happy to have the lobbyist registrar, Mr. Bogosian, weigh in on the conversation if you think that's helpful.
Yes,
okay.
The challenge that I'm experiencing is councillors can very easily refer to company A or individual A. They don't need to name names, and so that we don't go in camera. It just, when we're talking about transparency, every opportunity where we could be transparent, we should be taking that opportunity. That's
Thanks, Councillor Clark. Thank you. Mr. Bogosian, please.
Thank you. Obviously, under the Municipal Act, you have the right, but it's not necessary to go in camera to to receive a training session. So there is a discretion there. I can certainly see value in educating the public on the lobbyist registry. I do think there is a lack of knowledge on the part of a lot of smaller businesses especially. I think we see a lot of large corporations that have registered and not so much the smaller businesses who may not be as educated about it. So there is that value. I can also see the merit to councillors maybe wanting to be uninhibited in the questions that they ask, and that's another consideration. So I don't have a strong view either way.
Okay. Appreciate that. Thank you so much. Councillor Clark?
So I'll leave it to my colleagues. I don't think it's necessary. I'll simply be voting against going in camera. I think it's something that we could be holding in public very clearly. Thank you.
Okay, thanks so much. So Councillor Maureen Wilson?
Thank you. Similarly, it's been my position that in the scenario that was offered, I was always of the opinion that it's kind of unfair to the Integrity Commissioner to be asking for specific counsel in an entire committee of the whole session. That's unfair to the Integrity Commissioner. They don't have all the details, and that could inadvertently offer the member of council some sense that that is the same, that is counsel given and protection given, and I don't believe, in this case, I support Councillor Clark. It's just my opinion that it should be front-facing given where the onus lies. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Wang, please.
Thank you, Mayor. Just procedurally as a question then, should we vote down currently the motion to go into closed?
So the motion before us is to go into closed. That's what we're debating right now. Councillor Clark raised his concerns. Councillor Maureen Wilson raised her position, her comments. If you wanted to make comments, and then I'm going to call for the vote to go into camera.
So procedurally, I just wanted to ask, because we're speaking about it at this current juncture, what if after the presentation, could any member of council ask to go into closed to ask specific questions? Is that something that we can do later?
Anything is possible, but the motion before us is the one before us, and then once we dispose of that, unless you want to make an amendment to it, which I guess is up to you, but I think we should deal with what's ahead of us, right in front of us now in terms of the motion on the floor, and then if it fails, then you can bring a further motion in terms of a further initiative. How's that? Does that sound good?
Oh, okay.
Okay, any other comment on the motion before us, which is to receive the training in camera? Okay, so we will then go to the vote on the training in camera. So the motion to go in camera is defeated, 3-11. So then I'll look to the councillors to determine if there is another motion to replace that one, or if we just continue on with the Integrity Commissioner's report. I suspect that we would just continue because that's what's on the agenda, and if anything arises during the presentation, then that can be addressed as we go. And so I would ask then, item 4.1 is lobbyist registry training. So David Bogosian, Integrity Commissioner, Lobbyist Registrar for the City of Hamilton, is providing us with the training on the Lobbyist Registry. We will, I believe, go into a training session forthwith when everything is set up, and then we will go into the possibility for questions and answers. I would ask the lobbyist registrar to to identify whether you want to take questions throughout the presentation, Mr. Bogosian, or you prefer to go through the slide presentation and then ask questions. That would be your preference that I'm looking to understand.
Questions. In fact, I encourage taking questions as we go through. I want this to be as informal as possible, notwithstanding that I'm standing here at this formal podium. But please,
you can sit if you prefer.
Oh, no, I'm good here. I think it'll be more effective in terms of presenting for people to see me.
Okay. Can I just have you stop for 1 minute? And so we're going to still try to use as much as possible our speaker's request process because it'll be really hard for me to try to keep my eye on everything and do my due diligence in terms of paying attention to the presentation. So I'll be keeping an eye on the speaker's list while I have another eye on Mr. Bogosian. So please go ahead. Thank you. Welcome.
Good afternoon, Mayor and members of Council. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to present the Lobbyist Registrar training session today. As we were saying informally just a few moments ago, we encourage questions and comments as I go through it. I think doing it that way will kind of break down the formality, hopefully, and also allow you to ask questions when you're thinking of them instead of having to leave them to the end. If we can go to the next slide. So the slides are going to cover the Lobbyist Registry bylaw and its background, the nitty-gritty of the lobbyist definition, exemptions, and some examples just to see how it works. And then we'll go through the roles and responsibilities of myself as Lobbyist Registrar, lobbyists, and public office holders, which in the case of Hamilton's Lobbyist Registry bylaw includes all members of council and the members of the senior leadership team only. It does say Q&A as the last item, number 4, but again, I really encourage you to ask questions as we go along. Before I get further into the presentation, I do want to thank Chris Newman, who prepared an information sheet on the Lobbyist Registry that formed the basis of certainly the initial portions of the presentation I'm going to give and some of the content along the way going toward the end. And that was very helpful in terms of the history of the bylaw and how we got where we are today. So the Municipal Act provides the authority but not the necessity in the case of Hamilton, unlike the City of Toronto, which it's mandatory, to establish a lobbyist registry. And municipalities are given broad authority to define lobbying and specify what is required of lobbyists, as well as to make exemptions to the requirement to register. It authorizes the appointment of a lobbyist registrar, and it authorizes council to set out the inquiry powers of the lobbyist registrar.
Can I just ask a question? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
The City of Toronto is different because of the City of Toronto Act? That's why it's required, or can you clarify?
Yeah, the City of Toronto Act, I think because this whole regime came about due to a bit of a scandal in Toronto a few years ago, it was made mandatory for Toronto, but only discretionary for all the other municipalities in Ontario.
Okay, made mandatory by the legislation.
Yes, the City of Toronto Act. So the Lobbyist Registry was created, the bylaw was created through the Accountability and Transparency Subcommittee. Sorry, if we can go to the next slide. Which was made up of councillors, citizens, and members of the business community. The bylaw was enacted to bring transparency to lobbying activity at City Hall. It allows members of the public to see who is lobbying members of council, their staff, and the senior leadership team. And actually, the bylaw refers to senior management team, whereas the current reference is senior leadership team, but I don't think that makes any difference. They're all defined as public office holders in the lobbyist registry bylaw. It was passed by council in September of 2014 and came into effect in August of 2015. The City of Hamilton was the third municipality to implement a lobbyist registry after Toronto, where it was mandatory, and Ottawa. So really, Hamilton was the second to voluntarily bring a lobbyist registry into being. There are 9 other municipalities now that have opted to implement their own lobbyist registries. There's 9 in addition to the first 3, so that brings it to a total of 12. The most recent was Barrie. Burlington brought one in very recently as well. And many of the bylaws borrow heavily from Hamilton's bylaw.
Can we just stop for 1 minute?
No. Are you okay, Pascal? Yes, we all heard it. Are you okay? She's okay.
Everybody's okay? Okay. Sorry about that. Please go ahead.
So my office is the lobbyist registrar presently, with a lot of support from the clerk's office, in particular Chris Newman, who is effectively the administrator of the lobbyist registry. And while I'm on the topic of my firm, I wanted to introduce Avril Allen, who's my partner. She actually knows a lot more about the lobbyist registry bylaw than I do, and that's why she's here, in case there's any questions that her insights can assist in answering. The reporting structure for the lobbyist registry is Governance Review Subcommittee, through the Audit, Finance, and Administration Committee, and then to Council. Next slide. So the first and most important question you have to ask yourself when you're considering this bylaw is, what is lobbying? The City of Hamilton bylaw defines lobbying as communicating with a public office holder on prescribed subject matter with the goal of advancing a business or financial interest. Communication includes any oral, written, or electronic communication or any other expressive contact. And a public office holder is a member of council and members of, as the bylaw calls it, the senior management team, now known as the senior leadership team. The prescribed subject matter is varied, and we're going to go through those starting with the very next slide. So subject matter includes the development, introduction, passage, defeat, amendment, or repeal of any city bylaw, bill, or resolution to do with anything. Development, approval, amendment, or termination of a city policy, program, directive, or guideline. The purchase of goods and services, and the awards of contract by the city. The approval, whether with conditions or refusal, of any application for a service, grant, planning approval, permit, or other license or permission from the city. Next slide. The award of any financial contribution, grant, or other financial benefit by the city. The transfer of any asset or interest in asset to or from the city. And the act of arranging a meeting between a public office holder and any other person on any of the previous subject matters is also considered lobbying, is a subject matter which qualifies as lobbying. And there's a last one, which is communications regarding hiring, promoting, demoting, disciplining, or terminating any employee of the city who is a member of the city's senior management team. And I was pointing out to Avril this morning that technically could mean that a lawyer hired by a senior management person who was terminated or disciplined would have to register as a lobbyist in order to represent the member of the senior leadership team, given the definition in the bylaw. I think one of the stumbling blocks for a lot of smaller businesses who are not registering when they should be is that lobbying is considered by a lot of people out there as a dirty word. And that's an education process that needs to be undertaken to overcome that view of things, because lobbying is a valid part of the democratic process that has gone on since we've had democracy. It can shed light on the merits or flaws of a particular position, so there's merit to the educational component that lobbying can provide. It can be acceptable, but it does need to be out there in the open, and that's why that's where the registry comes in. So the goal of the lobbyist registry is to allow members of the public to see who is lobbying the City of Hamilton's public office holders, and it aligns with the city's values and strategic priorities of openness and transparency. Lobbying is not an offer or solicitation for a vote or a quid pro quo agreement for action in exchange for some benefit. Those are all very offside things, potentially criminal or conflict of interest. But there's no prohibition against influence without a quid pro quo. Next slide. So one of the things I'm hoping that we might clear up during my term as lobbyist registrar is the myriad exceptions, many of which in my view are redundant because they cover circumstances that don't even qualify as lobbying under the definition. And it just makes for a very unduly complex analysis when it comes to looking at whether there's been a breach of the bylaw, as we learned, quite frankly, in the Cubitt report, which is the one and only report we've done on a lobbyist registry complaint during my term. So exceptions are any communication during council or committee meetings or any other public process like an open house or a hearing, requests for information, extending compliments or complaints, or the request for application, interpretation, or enforcement of a particular bylaw or policy of the city. Routine communications are also exempted for applications, approvals, permits, as are routine communications concerning procurement. And these exemptions also puzzle me because I can't imagine a routine application that would involve a member of the senior leadership team, let alone a member of council. So those exemptions are kind of curious to me.
Can I ask you to stop for a moment? I have a question. Councillor Wang, please go ahead.
Oh, no, I was going to wait until
You don't have
okay,
to.
So,
in fact, I think it would
can you go
break
ahead
up the monotony of hearing my voice if you ask the question now.
Thank you. When we talked about lobby exemptions and when we were talking about a group of people, I get confused because I'm understanding if it is a business, what happens when it's a student group where they don't have a business, it's not a not-for-profit, it's also tangentially attached to potentially an academic institution. They're not technically residents of my ward. So how does that work?
They're not residents of your ward.
In my ward, yes. I'm in
so
Ward 4,
we're going to get to it, but there is an exemption for constituents, any constituent of a councillor, and in the case of the mayor, any resident of Hamilton can lobby their councillor, or in the case of the mayor, without having to register. If it's a nonprofit group that has no employees, they don't have to register either. There's a specific exemption for that.
Oh.
And the other thing is there has to be a financial or business gain or benefit. In other words, it has to be a business or financial interest that's being advanced.
Okay.
So I don't know the situation, but if the school group is not advancing a financial or business interest, then they don't need to register because it isn't lobbying.
Oh, okay.
So keep that in mind, business and financial interests. Those are the things that lobbying, the lobbyist registry is intended to capture.
That helps.
But we're going to get to questions like pre-arranged questions that were provided to me in advance that I've incorporated into the slides. And it may be that when you get to them, because I know one of the questions is similar to what you asked, you may be able to refine the question and I might be able to give a better answer.
Thanks. So we have two more questions. Councillor Maureen Wilson and then Councillor Pauls.
Thank you, Mayor Horvath. Could you please clarify, I thought you were musing about F1, 2, and 3. I'm not sure I understood what you were saying.
Well, we'll get to it in particular, but routine communications for applications, approvals, or permits means submitting drawings. For example, if you're applying for a building permit, submitting whatever else is required to satisfy the building department in getting a permit, which one would expect to be at a lower level, not by a senior leadership team member, let alone a member of council. So what's contemplated by F are routine filings and communications about how's my application going, when do you think it's going to be ready, when's the decision going to be made, submitting plans, submitting paperwork. That was what I mused about, that I can't see that realistically ever coming into play in the case of a public office holder as defined in the lobbyist registry bylaw.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Pauls, please.
Thank you. I don't know if this is going to be answered as you move along, but I was wondering, when election time comes and we have restaurant owners, financial developers, builders, and they give you, some funds to help your campaign. Is that considering lobbying on their part or on my part?
Yeah, that comes under a totally separate regime under the Municipal Elections Act.
Okay.
So I don't think that's affected by the lobbyist. Lobbying is communication. And I guess you could consider giving money communication in a way, but I don't think it's contemplated as falling under this bylaw, and it would be a Municipal Election Act campaign finance issue. It's interesting because
you could see, they want to make sure the councillor, they get to know the councillor. Like, I'm just asking, we just want to make sure if it's not under that, that's fine.
No, there's other legislation that is.
Okay.
Well, where you might want to be careful in that scenario is where they give you the money and they start talking about how you might want to vote on something.
Yeah, you can't take money for votes.
Yeah. I definitely know that.
That was a couple of slides
It's such a fine line that, do they have to register? Do I have to make sure? That, I'm just saying that. It's just such a fine line there. Thank you.
Making a campaign donation in and of itself doesn't fall under the lobbyist registry bylaw.
You're clear, right, Councillor Pauls? You're good? Okay. Thank you. Please continue.
Next slide.
Oh, Councillor Cretch, please. I'm sorry.
I exchanged an eyebrow with Councillor Maureen Wilson earlier, and so I wanted to just get the eyebrow out. Because when you said routine communications, I think we both had a kind of thought. And my thought was, I think what you're saying, if I understand correctly, is that when someone, whoever, is involved in the routine communications, that can't be considered lobbying. However, some people are wild. They will just copy councillors on stuff or copy senior leadership team stuff on very routine communications. We may think of them as routine, but then they kind of implicate these people into the activity by copying them. It's just an email, right? So I guess what I was wondering about is how you understand that situation. Because those wouldn't be considered routine or what? Because again, some people are wild.
Mr. Voloshin?
I think we're going to need a more concrete example, like for what exactly was the content of the letter. If there's just copying their counselor on a letter saying, why is my application taking so long? I don't see that as being lobbying.
Right, so I guess I'll be more specific.
Trying to get the attention of the official who is responsible for the application. So you're going to have to gauge it on a case-by-case basis. I don't think I can sit here and generalize to every possible scenario where a counselor is copied on a letter to an official who's responsible for licensing or permitting or whatever.
Councillor Crush, did you want to tease it out a little bit more to get a clearer response?
Yeah, I'll use your own example. So your example was about building permits, I believe. And so you're copied on a building permit and the person says, hey, I expect this is going to go, like, you know, there's some kind of forceful communication that you might consider they have a business interest, they want to get this to happen quickly. And it seems like a routine communication because it's just drawings or whatever it might be. But they bother to copy the counselor, they bother to copy SLT, and they kind of say to you, I want you to do X. That seems like it might be lobbying if they have a business interest. I just wanted to get a sense from you if that's what you meant by routine, because I'm just introducing to the conversation that there's very little routine in this kind of zone for counselors sometimes, where people will just go ahead and be excited.
Well, I think it's a judgment as to whether they've crossed the line of intending to advance a business or financial interest. So you've got to gauge it depending on what the ask is, or whether, if it's a usual ordinary course of business communication, and they just, for whatever reason, you know, you see it in practice that, you know, they think they'll light a fire under the butts of the officials if they copy the counselor. That's pretty common, and I don't see that as lobbying.
Okay,
because it's really not directed even at you, it's directed at that official.
And it's the lobbyist's responsibility to register anyway, so you're...
That's true, yeah. I do want to stress that too, that there are virtually no obligations on public office holders. In particular, you don't have to, you're not required to police this. You don't have to check ID, you know, you don't have to, are you on the registry? I need to check the registry. It's up to them. I would hope that if you really feel like you're being lobbied and you have a good reason to believe that they aren't registered, that you would point that out and say you really need to register. But you don't have to go out of your way to educate yourself or interrogate that person. They have that obligation.
Thanks. Okay. Okay, please continue.
All right. Next slide, please. We're continuing with these exemptions. A response to a public office holder's written request. So if a person is invited to participate or address an issue, that's exempted. Stakeholder participation in city-initiated processes. If there's a task force or something, they may happen to have an interest, a business or financial interest in the subject matter, that's exempted. J, taking a position on whether a policy or program will benefit the community, provided no business or financial interest in the outcome. That's a good example of an exemption that's redundant, because if it doesn't involve a business or financial interest in the outcome, it isn't lobbying. But there is that exemption. Business and financial interests of not-for-profit business entities with no paid staff. That's verbatim out of the bylaw. Business or financial interests of constituents, including operators of businesses and entities in the ward, or in the case of the mayor, the entire city. I do think it's a bit overly broad to exempt anyone who wants to deal with the mayor's office simply because they happen to be a resident of Hamilton, but that's something to be considered in any potential amendments to this bylaw. In extremely rare circumstances, I'm not aware of any that have ever occurred in Ontario since this legislation came into force, but there is an option of the lobbyist registrar to exempt lobbying if it would be harmful to the economic interest or competitive position of the city. and that's to be sought by the lobbyist in advance of the communication occurring. Next slide. And then there's exemptions that broadly cover communications with other governments or members of other councils or the province, the provincial legislature, the premier's office, etc. They cover practically every governing body within Ontario, other provinces, the federal government, and government outside the borders of Canada. Any sort of dealings in that respect is not considered to be lobbying to the extent that you're approached by any such person. Next slide. So now we've got just a couple of case studies that I do want some participation with if you're up for it. We've got some examples in a social setting, a business setting, and a government setting. So let's start with the social setting. Sorry, 1 second. Okay. So this is a fact scenario where Mr. Gray approaches Councillor Blue at a charity gala. The municipal council in which Councillor Blue sits has been considering a fireworks bylaw which would ban the sale of firecrackers within the municipality. Mr. Gray and Mr. Blue have known each other for a long time. They reminisce about how much they enjoyed playing with firecrackers when they were kids. Mr. Gray mentions that there was no harm done by firecrackers and that things should just stay the same. And Mr. Gray, it turns out, owns a corner store that does a good business in firecrackers. So the question is this lobbying and does it fall under any exemption?
Any takers?
Yes, it's
any
lobbying.
opinions? Come on, this is like a workshop. You get to
I would
jump in.
argue that it would be yes, that when Mr. Gray indicates he owns a corner store that sells firecrackers, he in fact is potentially losing that financial income and therefore should be lobbying.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else disagree? Anyone think any exemption might apply? Well, if we can click it one more time. So yeah, back. Yep, there's the answers. So the communication itself, it falls under the definition of lobbying. He's trying to advance a business or financial interest of maintaining his firecracker sales. There could be an exemption. We didn't provide enough information, but there could be an exemption if Mr. Gray is a constituent of Councillor Blue, in which case it's exempted. He doesn't have to register.
Very good. Councillor Nan, please go ahead.
Thank you. Okay, so Mr. Gray owns the business. Councillor Blue, right?
Yeah.
Is his councillor, his ward councillor.
Well, he could be. We didn't make it all that clear.
All right,
here.
so if Councillor Blue was Mr. Gray's ward councillor, i.e. Mr. Gray is a constituent that resides in the ward.
Or his business is located.
Or runs the business
in the ward.
Yep.
In the ward. And it is in Mr. Gray's interest that this bylaw does not come into effect because his personal business is going to be impacted, reducing sales. That's not lobbying?
It's lobbying, but it's exempted by the constituent exemption.
So Mr. Gray would not need to register?
Exactly.
Got it.
That's under the city's bylaw. There's no requirement that there be a constituent exemption. There is in this bylaw. So.
Okay, Councillor Alex Wilson, please, question.
Yeah, it's just the exact same point. Just wondering if that could be weighed in on as if you could maybe opine just on exemption L, if there's need to restrict it based potentially in your advice seeing other municipalities, L being the constituency one that we were just talking about. It just seems to me that, say, for example, if you have rental housing business, everywhere that you have a rental housing building, is that not the place of the operation of the business or things like that? Like you personally may live in a different city. How do you define where your property management company is housed out of, especially smaller property management companies that don't have their own site, but just operate purely out of it? So just trying to understand how maybe that has been constrained, or that understand you're educating us on what's in the bylaw today.
Yeah. There haven't, like for integrity commissioner decisions, there's a huge body of law. There's very little on the lobbyist registry, lobbyist registrar decisions. It just hasn't come up that much. So there aren't a lot of precedents, and I'm not aware of any that deal with this constituent exemption. I'd have to look at it. I haven't thought about it, whether if they've got 30 rental housing units, buildings, spread across the city in all various wards, whether they're by constituents of each of those wards. I'd have to think about it and look at the whole business framework to come to a decision on that.
So thanks for that. I don't see any other questions, but it raises one for me, which is in a situation like this, where, it's gray, like there's no real kind of specific, but you feel funny about it, I would say just recommend that they register, because it's not the wrong, lobbying is not wrong. It's part of doing the work of a council or of government of any kind, to cover to cover your discomfort, but also, protect the person or the company or whatever that's speaking to you. You can always just suggest or recommend. It's their decision. You don't have an obligation to do that, but it might save a whole lot of heartache in the future, especially when it comes to our lobbyist registrar having to make a decision.
Yeah, so I totally agree with that, and you can always contact me for advice, just like you do with the code of conduct. If you feel uncomfortable, contact me and say, I'm just wondering if I'm this lobbying and whether I should be suggesting to this person that they register. There is talk about being able to amend, possibly like an amendment of this bylaw to allow amendments to the registry after the fact. If you, right now it says, we'll get to it, but it says you have to register up at least one day before the actual lobbying activity, the first lobbying activity, and that lasts for a year. Having a grace period where maybe you can amend. Chris and I were talking just before we came in here today about a scenario where you're having a meeting, you expect you're having a meeting with a councillor, you come in and all of a sudden there's a general manager there or the city manager's there, and you didn't register that. To be able to go in and amend within a period of time after that meeting where you didn't expect to run into the other public office holders, to amend to add their names to the registry. That might be a good idea.
Okay, so and I appreciate that. I think that that's why we're having this conversation in the first place, to look at whether there might be some changes that people might want to see to the registry, and that would be the work of, I think, AFNA and maybe governance. So on that note, Councillor Danko has a question.
So picking up the thread on the current discussion, so the example of an investment property owner has multiple properties. Those properties, they don't live in your constituency, but their property is. Extending that to a development industry scenario where the developer doesn't live in your constituency, their business is not located in your constituency, but a specific project is.
Well, from experience, I know developers tend to register a separate corporation for each of their developments. Yep. So they can say, I was lobbying, on behalf of XY. Well, actually, no, you can't do that. It would have to be someone within XYZ Corporation that owns the development property, because the constituency exemption does not cover third-party lobbying. In other words, lobbying of you by a constituent in favor of someone else, of a third party. So they can only lobby for themselves, their personal interests, their own personal business interests, but they can't lobby for a third-party business or person. They can't advance their business or financial interest. So it is possible that if you got the president of the XYZ company that owns the development property, that it may fall within that constituent exemption.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Please proceed.
Click one more time. I suddenly realized that we may have given you these these slides with the answers, so you may have our attempt to be secret here. It may not be working, but anyway, hopefully you didn't read it in advance. Oh, okay then. So I'm going to change this fact situation is not particularly good. So I'm going to change it, which is Mr. Teal and Councillor Yellow have a variety of businesses together, business interests, for which they meet monthly to discuss. Mr. Teal alone owns a pro hunting shop, which is not in Councillor Yellow's ward. And in fact, Mr. Teal, it's in his municipality, but Mr. Teal lives in a neighboring municipality. And basically, Mr. Teal brings up the fact that it would be really beneficial to his hunting store business if more hunting licenses were given out for pheasants. And the municipality regulates the number of hunting licenses given out via its hunting bylaw in this vague scenario. So the question is, has Mr. Teal lobbied Councillor Yellow, and if so, are there any exemptions that might apply? Any thoughts? Yes.
If they're partners in a business, wouldn't the councillor have a conflict of interest to begin with?
That's why I changed it. I changed it on that for that reason, to say that they don't own the hunting business together. They have other business interests together. I changed it from that in what I said verbally, because you're right, it was such a blatant, obvious thing before.
So you get what he's saying, right? That instead of it being that scenario, he made a slight change to take out that conflict of interest piece, Councillor Clark. So the question is still live then. Is it lobbying? I would say yes. That would be my opinion, that it is lobbying and it's not exempt in any way. Anybody else? Yep. Any takers?
Okay, let's click for the answer.
Oh, I don't want to be wrong. Tevye, you cannot report if I was wrong.
That is absolutely right. It is a clear example of lobbying. It's a communication to advance a business or financial interest. Councillor Yellow is a public office holder as defined. The financial interest is obviously enhancing the pro hunting shop business. There's been an attempt to amend the municipal bylaw, and the exemption wouldn't apply here because neither the business nor Mr. Teal live in Councillor Yellow's constituency ward, so they're not constituents. Next slide. So Councillor Orange and Councillor Blanche are friends. They sit on different municipal councils of two different municipalities. Councillor Orange wrote to Councillor Blanche for advice about Blancheville's recently amended building permit bylaw. Councillor Blanche had made efforts to solicit improvement suggestions from some local contractors. Councillor Blanche shares these suggestions with Councillor Orange and adds that Orangeville's, where Councillor Orange sits, Orangeville's building permit bylaw could use an update. Is this lobbying? And is it covered by any exemption?
Come on, any takers? Councillor Wayne?
do not think it is lobbying because it sounds like it's two colleagues that are talking to each other. And I think that that would be exempt because there's no business interest here.
Okay.
Okay, let's click one more. Correct. It is not lobbying. It would be exempt. First of all, Councillor Blanchard doesn't have a financial or business interest in having Orangeville's building bylaw amended. Secondly, members of different councils conversing with one another fall within the exception in section 6D of the bylaw. When they're acting in their public capacity, they're exempt from registration requirements. So there's a number of levels on which this is not lobbying, or if it was exempted. Next slide. The role of the lobbyist registrar, we are to ensure, this is according to the bylaw, that the lobbyist registry is available for public inspection. I look at it occasionally. I don't police that. I think Chris Newman is the administrator and effectively ensures that it is kept up to date and is properly visible. I do provide opinions, interpretations on the administration, application, and enforcement of the lobbyist registry bylaw. I thought it might interest you that I've received 12 inquiries. Questions about, is what I'm doing lobbying? Do I have to register this year so far? 4 of them were before the Cubit decision, and 8 of them were after. So getting publicity out about the lobbyist registrar bylaw has helped. We've seen a surge, maybe that's a strong word, but certainly a spike in an uptick in, maybe better, thank you, Councillor Nan, an uptick in the registrations since that decision came out.
Councillor Wayne?
Thank you. I'm still trying to understand the difference between advocacy and lobbying because, again, going back to the the students organizing in a group, not-in-profit, they may or may not have a paid employee there. Again, they're not in my ward, they're not a business, they're advocating on, say, bylaw changes, or they're advocating on our budget, or those are all potentially financial interests on their end, like private financial interests. When is it lobbying and when is it advocacy?
Well, there's an exemption that covers this, and that turns on whether they have a business. If we can go back to slide 12. So what I was thinking about is exemption J, taking a position on whether a policy or program will benefit the community, provided there is no business or financial interest in the outcome. So they need to ask themselves, and perhaps you do, and suggest to them that if their group has a financial or personal interest, business interest in the outcome, it goes beyond advocacy. It's now something that qualifies as lobbying and should be registered.
So this raises a question for me, and I'm just going to ask it because I hear what you're saying, and I wonder as well. So, for example, if we have a couple of different post-secondary educational institutions in our city, and they have student bodies that advocate on behalf of student issues to various orders of government for things like, I don't know, what would be a thing? Fair transit, free transit, landlord licensing, maybe some land use things, maybe environmental issues, all kinds of different things. They have staff, but there's no real business gain to the, let's call it a student union or a student association. and there's no financial interest as the Students Association necessarily. There might be a personal gain if you get the fares down, then you don't have to pay as much for the bus, kind of thing. So I guess that just kind of fleshes out. Is that what you're getting at, Councillor Wang? That kind of fleshes it out a little bit in terms of some of the details. My sense is that would still not be lobbying, it would be advocacy, but it would be really good to hear your position on that.
Well, I guess you need to ask whether there's a business or financial interest in the outcome on the part of that organization or its members. I was thinking it when Councillor Clark was saying it, which is there. An analogy is in the Conflict of Interest Act if it's something that is of general benefit to everyone in the community. For example, transit fares is not just limited to a benefit to university students or college students. So that, I think, would be something that we would likely find fell within Exemption J because the business or financial interest is so widespread and not limited to them that we wouldn't call that a personal financial or business or financial interest of that organization or its members.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Danko?
Further on this topic, because it's a difficult differentiation, there's all kinds of social justice organizations that lobby on all kinds of different issues that are very active. They have an organized structure, board of directors, paid staff, and you could make the argument that they do have a financial interest in their relevancy and their ability to be funded by the effectiveness of their advocacy. And if I could use one example, would be Acorn actively lobbying on behalf of various bylaws in terms of rental units and that kind of thing, and their members do have a direct financial interest.
Tenants. You mean tenants?
Yes.
Okay. I wrote a letter about this. I didn't write a decision, but very much on point. And what I would say to that question, Councillor Danko, is that tenants are such a widespread group that it falls within that notion of it's something that's of benefit to the community as a whole, as opposed to, you can't, it's such a widespread group, it's such a massive proportion of the population that I would tend to find that doesn't qualify as a business or financial interest.
Thanks. Thank you. Okay, back to wherever we were on the slides.
Slide 19, I think.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, so I think I ended up by saying we've had an uptick in registrations, and since that public report, an uptick in inquiries, and I think that's a good thing, and it just shows that education is important to generate people signing up on the registry. I think Councillor Wilson has a question.
Thank you. I clearly understood and agree with the explanation or response you gave Councillor Danko using the Acorn example, but I respectfully don't think you answered the second part of his scenario on the perhaps interpretation of financial interest, in that even we know sometimes that there are associations who, as part of sometimes their ability to qualify for or compete against the receipt of, say, public monies, they have to show some deliverables, and it is in their financial interest, even though what they have delivered is widespread in its community benefit. Could you just answer that part of the question?
I don't think I understand the question. I'm so sorry.
No, the question posed by Councillor Danko was that sometimes in order for agencies that are advocating for policy change, their financial dependency sometimes on operational monies. They have to show deliverables in that they were successful in getting a change in policy X, they were successful in getting a change in policy Y, and that enables them to compete more successfully for membership dollars or provincial money or foundational money. I don't think you answered the financial component of that scenario, at least as I understood Councillor Danko's question.
Okay, well, if there's going to be, if they're advancing their own business interest or financial interest, then yes, that then becomes lobbying. If the goal they're attempting to attain is going to enhance their financial interest or their business interest, then that does fall within lobbying. And if they're not a nonprofit with no employees, then they will be covered by the lobbyist registry bylaw. So yes, in that scenario that you gave me, which I hadn't really thought of and would probably have to be supported fairly clearly to me, in the case of an organization like that, that there is that financial or business interest, I would consider that lobbying, yes. That doesn't fall within an exemption.
Councillor Nan?
Okay, another example, nonprofit related. So let's say our Interval House, which works steadfast around sexual violence against women, come to advocate to a council member to pass a bylaw, or say that the municipality has a role to play, a bigger role to play in helping eradicate sexual violence or gender-based violence in our community. They're a not-for-profit organization that fundraise for their existence, on occasion apply for grants. They have paid employees, they have a board of directors. It is in the community's interest to advance a society where gender-based violence is eradicated. Their primary existence is on that premise of aiming to eradicate gender-based violence in our communities and support survivors. So in your last response to Councillor Wilson's question, which was Councillor Danko's question, that should they seek municipal action towards those shared principles and goals, they would be considered lobbyists if they would financially benefit or be seen as an effective organization to advance those social values?
Well,
how is that different from tenant rights? I'm just, you know, like all of a sudden now we're equating rights movement work to financial gain, and based on that agency and organization's mandate to fulfill its purpose, which is a greater purpose, which is a community benefit, right? But it could be viewed as lobbying if their success in getting this council table to join them in their calls to action could put them in a beneficial position with another granting organization.
Okay, do you know how long it takes to register? 5 minutes.
No, I get it.
I don't understand what the
really
big deal
clear.
is about
Okay, hold on.
Yeah, I just want to
Mr. Kogosian, hold on, excuse me. We're here to get answers from you.
Yeah.
They're not challenging you. They're trying to figure out what we should be saying to our not-for-profit organization. So I don't want the temperature to get up. I want the temperature to stay down, because this is a legitimate conversation about what we should be telling certain people or certain organizations based on what our bylaw currently says. And I noticed that your colleague, Avril Allen, also was wanting to provide some clarity, if I'm not mistaken. I saw your hand go up. Is that the case?
Oh, yes. Oh, thank you. Yeah, I think it's just going to be a matter of evidence in each case. So if a group indicates that it's our goal to enhance the financial and business interests of our organization, then it will be very clear. But if it's a very indirect situation where you would really have to work hard to draw an inference that that is the ultimate goal of the organization, it's going to be a different situation. So it's just a matter of evidence in each case. What is the goal of the organization?
That is very helpful and very clear, because the existence of the organization is to advance a larger social correction in society. Their existence isn't to make money.
Okay.
Got it.
If I can just add two things. One is, let me read exemption 5J rather, because there's more to it than what's on the slide, and I think it goes directly to the question. It says, this is an exemption, communications for or against a policy or program that state a position where the primary focus is a broad community benefit or detriment, whether citywide or local, and where that position would have no direct, indirect, or perceived benefit to a business or financial interest of the individual business or other entity on whose behalf the communication is undertaken. So that's, I think that's germane to the question. Like I said, I would probably require in that case very strict proof that there is some kind of benefit that can be attributed to the organization, a financial or business benefit as a result of this general policy, and obviously very extremely admirable and needed policy input.
Thank you, Councillor Nan. You okay? Councillor Clark, please.
So if a not-for-profit is advocating for policy change across many classes in a municipality, and there is no evidence of a direct financial gain to that organization, it would not be deemed to be lobbying. If an organization is advocating for policy change, but also advocating for a grant for themselves to enable them to help make that change in the broader community, then that would be lobbying.
The latter example is very clear.
Yes.
I'm not going to commit 100% on the first scenario because it depends on how significant their achieving a given policy change or is to the impact on their funding, and I think that would have to be looked at case by case.
May I ask one more question?
Sure, please go ahead.
Thank you. Whether there are organizations that are not for profit or for business, and they're not sure if they should be lobbying, they can clearly call you and ask for your advice. Is that correct?
Absolutely. Like I said, it happens. It's happened a dozen times already this year. We had a spike after the publicity of the Cubitt report, and absolutely, that's one of my functions.
So when in doubt, call the registrar. Okay, thank you.
And that's obviously insulating. Just like on the code of conduct, if I've given you an opinion, I can't obviously go back and find you in violation later on. Okay, so among other powers that I have is to conduct inquiries on requests made by the council or the public respecting the conduct of lobbyists, suspension of a lobbyist and prohibition from lobbying, It can be from various length of times. The default is 30 days for the first offense. Removing a lobbyist registration or refusing a lobbying registration. Those are various powers that I could exercise depending on the transgression. Next slide.
Can I just ask a question? So I just want to go back to that previous slide, if you may, if you please. All of the things, what the registrar may do, is all respecting the conduct of lobbyists or organizations that may, in fact, be or not be considered lobbyists. Just again, this is the onus is on the organization, the person, not on the councillor.
No, there's no sanctions against councillors in here. The only one is, and we'll get to it, is if you refuse to cooperate with an investigation.
Okay, thank you.
So a lobbyist is to register at least one day before the first lobbying communication occurs. The registration of a subject matter is only valid for 1 year. If a lobbyist plans to continue lobbying for over a year, you have to re-register. And as part of registering a subject matter, lobbyists are required to input key information such as their name, contact information, who they're lobbying on behalf of if it's not for themselves personally, who is to be lobbied, and when approximately, it doesn't have to be an exact date, the lobbying is expected to start and finish. And again, you may want to consider whether to allow amendments so that instead of having to, fill out a whole new, complete a whole new registration every time, although it's not that onerous, that if you simply were able to go in and amend to add subject matter to the original registration or the identities of public office holders who, you are going to lobby and allow that to happen for a certain period of time after the actual lobbying activity took place, which some other lobbyist registry bylaws have, such as Niagara Regions. Public office holders are responsible for responding in a timely and complete manner to a request from the lobbyist registrar to gather and provide information. And you're to end as soon as practical lobbying by a lobbyist who is prohibited from lobbying and report such lobbying in a timely manner to the lobbyist registrar. So you have no proactive obligation. But if you learn that someone is, well, you will learn because every public office holder is required. If I suspend somebody, as I think you saw happen, you're all going to get an email or a letter advising of that suspension so that you're all aware. Every public office holder is aware that for a certain period of time that person is not allowed to lobby you. And like we put in the gray box to the right on this slide, other than when responding to a request, an office holder is not required to gather information concerning people that are lobbying her or him. You're not having to act like the lobbyist cop. You do not have to do that. It would be of a public benefit, in my personal opinion, if you did make an inquiry, if you thought you were being lobbied and had reason to think that the person wasn't registered, but that's not even a requirement under the bylaw.
We have a question from Councillor Pauls.
I don't know if this makes sense, but what's the difference between a delegate that comes, like, let's say we passed the stormwater, the rain tax, and we had all the farmers lined up here, and they're talking about their opposition of what we want to do. And they're lobbying for themselves because it's not lobbying. What's the difference between somebody coming and lobbying all of us not to do that?
There's an express exemption for that type of communication at a public meeting, including a council meeting, a committee meeting. So it's automatically exempted if
if it's
in this
public.
setting.
So lobbyist is only when one counselor gets pulled aside.
Nope, there can
No.
be multiple. It's just a matter of, that's an exemption. That would be lobbying, except it's exempted because it's at a public meeting. A council meeting, committee meeting. It's not necessarily the numbers, it's the environment.
Yeah, sometimes I don't understand what's our role as a counselor, listening to our constituent. Let's say one of my constituents has a restaurant and wants to put a patio, and he comes to me and he says, Counselor, please pass the motion for a patio because I'm not making any money unless I have patio outside. And he only approaches me. What's my role as a counselor to say, yes, I will make sure, I'll vote for that to help you out? Is that lobbying?
It is, but it's exempted because
He's your constituent.
So
constituents are an exemption.
Oh,
So
great.
constituents that live in your ward are an exemption in our current bylaw, as well as businesses that operate in your ward are also exempted in our current bylaw.
Okay, thank you.
Correct? Correct, Mr. Bogosian?
So any business
Correct.
that's in my ward, I can advocate for them,
Yes.
right? Okay, thank you.
Well, yeah, and it wouldn't be considered lobbying when they meet with you, which is the point of our
Correct.
meeting today.
Thank you.
Well, yeah, I'm going to get to another slide that's going to put a slight caveat to my answer, but we'll get to it. Okay, enforcement. Individuals can request that the lobbyist registrar investigate and conduct inquiries respecting compliance with the bylaw. A request can be made by contacting the office of the city clerk. They complete a form and they have to pay a fee of $100, which is refunded if there is a finding of improper lobbying without registration. Next slide. So we were kindly provided with some questions in advance from councillors. These were all done anonymously, or at least they're anonymous here. So I wanted to go through them, and there were some really good questions, and it kind of will reinforce what we've already gone through. So the first one is there an option for a lobbyist to register as a general lobbyist? And then a related question, there are some groups that have interests in planning, development, and climate change and social justice. Do they have to register for every possible topic? And I think we misunderstood the first question when we put that first bullet answer, which says no, must specify whether you're a consultant, in-house, or voluntary unpaid lobbyist, which are the three different types of lobbyists identified in the lobbyist registry bylaw. I think this meant, can you just register saying general lobbyist, in other words, not specifying a topic? And no, you can't. You have to specify the subject matter. Yeah, you have to, every topic that you intend to lobby on needs to be registered for. And if it comes up and you find that you want to lobby on something else, you have to do a further registration. Possibly in the future, it will be more streamlined so that someone can amend their existing registration to add additional public office holders they've spoken to, and more importantly for this question, the additional subject matters of the lobbying. Next slide. So this is just an example of what currently happens. So every time you want to add a new category of lobbying, you need to do another registration. This is from the public registry. So this is all public information. So this particular individual has agreed to lobby financial services, affordable housing, and planning and development. So that is all separate registrations they had to do for each of those categories. Next slide. So this is the current, or at least as of a week or two ago, breakdown of the categories of lobbying that are currently registered on Hamilton's lobbyist registry. You'll see the biggest number of registrations at over 140 is for planning and development. Notice affordable housing is second with 70 registrations. And other notable categories of lobbying: economic development, the environment, public health, real estate, property, and transportation. That's just called from a review of the current registry, what the current registry sets out. Next slide. And then of the three categories of lobbyists the bylaw recognizes, these are the proportions of registrations by type of lobbyist. And then there were a few that were left blank.
Okay, we have a question. Councillor Cassar, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Could you just give a brief definition of the three different types so it's clear? Thank you.
A consultant, that's basically where you're lobbying, you're a third-party lobbyist. So you're working for Strategy Corp or something, like, I hate to pick a real name, but you're acting for a lobbyist or a consulting company, and you're representing a client to the public office holders. In-house is if you work for that company and you're lobbying on behalf of your corporation or your entity or your business, that would make you in-house. And volunteer is if you work for a not-for-profit and you're not paid. So you volunteer. You're literally...
You're the chair of the board, for example, of a nonprofit, and you come and lobby.
So, yeah. Okay, the question on slide 27, if we can go there. What if the group is a neighborhood-based community group nonprofit in my ward? Do they have to register? They are technically not a resident nor a business per se. So, and then the related question, what if the person, and these were questions from different councillors, what if the person lives in my ward and has a lobbyist interest? Where do I draw the line? Are they a resident in my ward, but the conversation bleeds into other areas? So I think going more to the first question, the constituent is defined as not just an individual or a business, but actually an entity, including nonprofits and groups, quote, groups. So it's pretty broad as to what constitutes a constituent. They can communicate, and this is important, I think I've already said it once before, the constituent can communicate regarding their own business or financial interests with the councillor without registering under the bylaw. But you can't do third-party lobbying. In other words, if I'm a constituent of Councillor Wilson, I can't come in and start lobbying for some corporation belonging to a third party or some interest that isn't my own personal interests. I can only lobby for my own personal or my own business's interests, not that of a third party. And then I think this goes to the second question. The third bullet says if the constituent's business or financial interests are not implicated, the communication falls outside the definition of lobbying, so no registration would be required. And the fourth bullet just reiterates the point I made, which is a constituent lobbying on behalf of one or more third parties does not fall within the constituent exemption. It's only if it's their personal or their personal business interests that they're trying to advance.
Councillor Pauls, did you have a question? Go ahead.
I want to ask you, let's say I belong to a church, right? A big church, and they are doing a construction, right? And the people in the church always ask me things because I go to that church. So let's say they want to put a light in front of the church because it's going to be 1,600 people going to that church going out, and they need a light, I'd say. And so they lobby me to make sure I do. Is that lobbying? A lot of people live in my constituent. I go to that church. What's lobby or not? Am I not supposed to talk to anybody?
Okay, are you a light? Do you mean a traffic light in the
A
street?
traffic light, or the expansion of the church. And they ask me, when is the development going to? When are they going to stamp it? You know? And they ask me because I go to that church.
Well, they're an entity or a group or a nonprofit, so
They're a nonprofit, so it's okay.
it's okay.
All right.
That's okay. Can we go to slide 28, I think? Are developers and their agents required to be registered in the city's registry when there is an active land development application submitted and/or an application that is under appeal at the OLT? The answer, not necessarily. Developers' agents are required to register if they intend to communicate with a public office holder to advance an application or to encourage the councillor to get the municipality to withdraw, for example, an appeal. That is an equal business or financial interest. However, registration is not required for the following exempted communications, all of which really fall within the term routine communications. Well, the first one actually isn't. That's providing general information about the application or to inquire about the application review process. So that's exempted. If the communication is part of the normal course of the approval process, like I said, I am hard-pressed to think of any where a senior management team person or a member of council would be involved in the normal course of the approval process. This, to me, contemplates routine filings and follow-ups for timing, etc., and whether the application is complete. If the communication is with respect to planning or development applications, then the officer or employee has a role in the processing of the planning or development application during the formal pre-application consultation, the filing of the application, and the application review process, including the preparation of development agreements. So again, it's supposed to be routine type communications, not ask for support of that particular development or, you know, trying to encourage a member of council or else someone else to abandon an appeal, for example. Next slide. Does the code prohibit elected members of council from meeting with developers? Now this was a code of conduct question. Developers and their agents, when their lands are under appeal, are members of council required to disclose to the municipality when and if contact was made by a developer and or their agent for a file that is under appeal? So the answer to the first question is that there's no prohibition on meeting. In all likelihood, the developer should be registered. The developer and or their agent should be registered. We bring to your attention Section 10 of the Code of Conduct, the third bullet of which states, attempting to secure preferential treatment beyond activities in which members normally engage on behalf of constituents as part of their official duties. You may want to consider whether their involvement you're being asked to engage in is of that nature. And members of council are not required to disclose if they were contacted by a developer or their agent for a file that is under appeal. Once again, the onus to register as a lobbyist is that of the lobbyist. There's no onus on members of council to do that, but I would hope that you would pick up the phone and, or, you know, you don't need to go to the trouble of checking the lobbyist registry yourself, but call and alert the lobbyist registrar of that communication, because if you have reason to believe that they aren't registered. But again, no obligation there. So that concludes our presentation. Thanks for your patience. And I hope that you will encourage anyone that's speaking to you to register if it seems that they're trying to advance a business or financial interest, even though you're not obligated to do so. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bogosian. There's a couple of questions. I believe we have Councillor Maureen Wilson.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you. On your last slide, just in summary, if there's a land use planning matter under appeal to be heard by the tribunal, you can meet with the developer, but in so doing, separately, that could be construed as a code of conduct violation. Is that what you're saying?
No, if you act on it by attempting to influence in a manner that's determined to be trying to secure a preferential treatment beyond that which members normally engage as part of their official duties, that could be regarded as a breach of the code of conduct, but not simply listening to their pleas. It's any action you take on those pleas that could be scrutinized.
And thank you. So any action you take would be scrutinized if it was considered under review by the Integrity Commissioner that you were perhaps delinquent on your fiduciary responsibility, and instead in your vote or your advocacy around the chamber advancing not the corporate interests but the private interest. I'm just trying to make sure I understand what the counsel you're offering.
Okay, so here's a good example, not from this municipality. I can't imagine this happening in Hamilton, but in another municipality that I'm aware, I know of a situation where a councillor approached senior planning and development management on behalf of the developer and tried to encourage them to abandon an appeal that the municipality was taking from a decision in favor of the developer. So that's an example, I would say, of abusing your authority and acting in a way that you're trying to secure preferential treatment. So it was an attempt to lobby staff to abandon an appeal, and that is clearly a code of conduct violation.
Councillor Wilson?
So your measure is your measure is what you do with that, the example you gave, in relation to another public office holder. It's not what you seek to advance around the table on their behalf.
As long as they're registered, they should be registered. I mean, but even then you're not at fault, or you're not the one that's going to be.
I'm asking, I guess, sorry, more specifically, that on your slide, you made the distinction between a lobbyist measure and a code of conduct measure. And I suppose because you put that on the slide, I'm asking for further clarification on the measure on the code.
Well, somebody asked me the question about the code. I just, it may not be verbatim, but it's the gist of the question that a councillor put forward about, does the code prohibit this? And because it seemed related to the subject matter of this training seminar, I thought, yes, let's address it. And that's why I referred to a code issue here. That was a question I got from a councillor.
Councillor Wilson?
I'll take my query offline. I think it's important. It's distinction.
Sure, I'm happy to speak to anyone privately, over the phone, by email, about anything that wasn't clear to you or that I could give a better explanation of, or deal with specific examples.
Okay, I don't see any other questions. Do we have any other questions around the table? I don't see any. Any questions from the staff? Okay,
Thanks.
we don't see any. So
Thank you very
it's, thank you very much, Mr. Bogosian. Appreciate your presentation. I appreciate your slide deck. Appreciate your availability for follow-up for questions that might come as people ruminate on the discussion we've had today, the workshop that we've had. And so I would now then ask for a motion to receive the lobbyist registry training. Just wanted to say again, thank you to the staff, Chris and others who are here in terms of the administration of this, as well as Avril Allen, your associate, Mr. Bogosian, and yourself. Thanks so much for spending this time with us. And councillors, thank you for your participation in the workshop. I think it was very, very valuable. We'll now go for that motion to receive the lobbyist registry training. Moved by Councillor Clark, seconded by Councillor Francis. Please indicate your vote. You're welcome to take a seat, get a glass of water, do whatever you need to do. Thank you. So I guess the motion's on the floor to receive. Is there any discussion on the motion to receive? Oh, sorry. What was that? The vote was already up, but we would normally ask if there's any further discussion, and just wanted to make sure we do that. Seeing none, I've had ample time, so we'll go to the vote. Sorry about that. I'm not on open session, that's why. Yes, I'm thumbs up. That carries 12-0. Thanks very much. Councillor Beattie, may I have a motion on the bill?
Absolutely, Mayor. It's my pleasure to bring forward the following motion that Bill number 24-234 be passed and that the corporate seal be affixed thereto and that the bylaw be numbered and signed by the Mayor and the City Clerk to read as follows. 234 to confirm the proceedings of City Council, moved by myself and seconded by Councillor Brad Clark.
Thanks very much. Any speakers on the bill? Seeing none, we'll go to the vote, please. And that carries 12-0. Do we need a motion to adjourn now, or did we just do that? I'll take a motion from Councillor Cassar, seconded by Councillor Nan, to adjourn the meeting. Please put the vote up. Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Clark. The last one of the year. Merry Christmas. Carries 12-0. Thanks very much, everyone.